So I'm going to just go right into our last introduction. Really excited to speak with Lola Kassim, GM of Uber Eats Canada. As I mentioned at the top of the session, we're gonna talk about action and how do we put all of this stuff, like this, big bubble of learning, education, and systemic issues. How do we put it into action? So first of all, hi, Lola. Good to see you.
Very nice to see you as well, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for your patience. Really excited to end the session with you. Why don't you just quickly tell us a little bit about your background before I dive into some questions? And actually, first, I want to personally thank you for keeping me fed over the
Excellent.
I have been using Uber Eats almost every day, so thanks.
Good to know. So just quick bit of background. So yes, I'm the general manager of Uber Eats in Canada. So really looking after the overall kind of operations and strategy of the Uber Eats business here, which I've been doing since the beginning of the year. And prior to that, I've actually been working with Uber, but in West Africa. So I had the exciting role of being the general manager for the ride-sharing business in West Africa and have been based in Nigeria doing that. I've actually been in West Africa the last 8 years or so, between Liberia and Nigeria, working at Uber most recently, also doing some consulting work and some public sector work as well. Originally from Toronto and started my career in Ottawa, working in the Department of Indigenous Services on various policy issues a while back. But yeah, really excited to be here today and really excited to be in this role with Uber Eats.
Well, it sounds like you've got probably a really strong perspective on a lot of what we've been discussing, given your professional experience. But I would love to hear a little bit from you around the standards that you hold yourself and Uber Eats to when you're thinking about creating a fair and safe workplace.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a really great question. And I think for me, when I think about, what's a fair workplace, what's a safe workplace, for me, it has to be one that's equitable, that's diverse, and at the end of the day, something that's really inclusive. And, what does that really mean? Because we hear these words, inclusivity, diversity, all the time. And for me, it means that no matter who you are, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, your race, your gender, your religion, your class, where you went to school, where you grew up, none of that should matter in terms of you feeling like you can be yourself in the workplace. So when I look at kind of, our company, Uber, and, what does that mean? I mean, we've set a pretty ambitious, kind of goal of trying to be, essentially one of the most diverse and equitable workplaces out there. And that's not the kind of thing that, any company can achieve overnight. But I think part of it is thinking through kind of like, what are those practical things? What are those standards, or what are those things you want to set in place to try and get there? And so I think a couple of those to mention, are really around kind of the idea of transparency. A lot of folks who've been speaking this evening, and I really enjoyed kind of all the thought-provoking discussion, have spoken about, kind of data, right? And of course, data is just a starting place. Not all companies have the greatest data when it comes to diversity, et cetera. And, it's something, all sorts of businesses are working on. But at Uber, we've made a commitment to at least being transparent about the diversity data that we have through publishing annual diversity and inclusion reports, and really just sharing, hey, this is how we're doing, right? Yeah. This is where we stand in terms of representation of women, representation of Black employees, Latinx employees, et cetera, knowing that we've got a lot of room to grow. But I think by just, starting by putting that information out there, at least employees can start to hold the company accountable, the public can start to hold the company accountable, et cetera. And I think what else is key is kind of not just having the data, not just that transparency, but putting in place some sort of mechanisms that are really going to drive action. So something that's exciting for me is that, some of the senior executives at the company have essentially tied their pay towards improving some of our outcomes on these diversity metrics. So for, in particular, representation of women in leadership, as well as other underrepresented populations. And I think another key area where we've kind of really got to look at how do we create this fair and equitable workplace comes to hiring and talent acquisition, which again, a number of the folks tonight have touched on. We all know that we've all got biases. It's just part of being human. But in order to try and create the kind of workplace that we aspire to have, that many companies aspire to have, we've got to do our part to try and eliminate these kind of biases in the hiring process as much as possible. And it starts from things like just job postings. You know, a lot of the postings that, are put out there have kind of language that may, for example, disincentivize women from applying because the posting is framed in a way that makes women feel potentially not as comfortable or, feel that they could apply for this position. So something we're putting in place is literally like a filter to try and get rid of some of this type of language in job postings. And then thinking about the recruitment process, as folks have spoken about, how do you ensure that you've got a diverse slate of candidates coming through the pipeline, et cetera. So I think those are just, a few of the things that I think are critical for us when we think about how do we really create this safe and fair workplace.
Yeah, it's super thorough. And I'm curious, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of thought and frankly resources invested into doing this. Where do you think is still left for managers to just shift the status quo? Like, where do you see the future of solving some of these problems looking like?
Yeah. And I think, as I mentioned, this isn't going to change overnight, right? There is still plenty of work to be done. And I think part of it is setting up kind of these formal processes, formal structures, et cetera. But part of it's, as you think about managers and how you kind of create a safe and open spaces, what else can you do? And thinking about what do your employees need to feel safe? And it can be safe to share how they're feeling, safe to not share how they're feeling at certain times. Employees having the opportunity to be able to call out things that aren't right? And sometimes it's through having formal things like, for example, we have a hotline. If you see something or you feel that employees or yourself, you're being treated in a discriminatory way, you can call in. That's a formal process. But do employees feel like they have the ear of their managers if they've got something they want to chat about? Yeah. Is it a kind of space where employees feel like they can get together to talk about some of these things? So again, it's not going to, it's not going to happen overnight. But I think it's really about managers thinking through how can I ensure that I've got a bit of a pulse on how my employees are feeling, whether it's through, these formal initiatives or whether it's things that are a bit more informal and just ensuring that folks kind of feel they've got a place to share when they need to.
Yeah, it's so thorough. And just time for one more question. I'm curious to hear, you're obviously at the head of a really large operation. What are some of the challenges that you've been facing or dealing with, or some of the maybe expected or unexpected obstacles over this past, we can start with last 5 weeks, but even beyond, I think 2020 in general is full of just like challenges that coming from every direction. What have you been dealing with and kind of how are you solving in these kind of chaotic times?
Yeah, I think, your first two speakers, Antonia and Tommy, really resonated, what they were speaking about. Yeah. This year, the past 5-6 weeks, it's have honestly been a whirlwind, I think, for so many people, whether Black people in the workplace or people in general. I mean, we're unprecedented times, as folks have said. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. And then on top of that, a lot of these kind of issues of systemic racism have just flared up in such a real and raw and tangible way. So I think myself, my colleagues, just like everyone else, is just kind of trying to figure out how do we process this, right? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for our company? I think it's been exciting to, work somewhere where we've kind of had leadership from the top really kind of come out plainly and saying that, racism and discrimination have no place on our platform, and, trying to do our part to support Black communities, whether it's through supporting Black-owned restaurants or supporting small Black-owned businesses in Canada and across the US. So it's exciting to be part of that, but it doesn't, I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much going on, and it's going to take a lot for everyone to really kind of process and work through these issues.
I want to just say thank you again for doing this. I think your perspective and insight is super valuable. And just like everybody else, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share any sort of like announcements or plug or any message that you want to leave us with.
Sure. Well, I'd say if you haven't already, if you're someone who uses Uber Eats, really encourage you to check out the app. Something that we've been really excited about, something that's been really driven by our Black at Uber employee resource group, is an initiative that we've got to support Black-owned restaurants on the app. So check out the app. You'll see Black-owned restaurants in your area if you live in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. And, check out a new restaurant, support them. Really excited about this initiative.
Thank you so much, Lola.